G'day and welcome back to the channel. So this video is for anyone that has a leg length discrepancy or one leg shorter than the other. So the first thing that I want to point out right at the very start of this video is that there is a very small percentage of people that actually have a true leg length discrepancy or an anatomical leg length discrepancy where the distance from their hip bone to the base of their heel is physically shorter than the other side. Now that can happen for a number of reasons in terms of trauma, maybe knee or hip surgery. The interesting thing is the overwhelming majority of people that have a leg length discrepancy, and which is why I think this video is potentially important for a lot of people, a lot of people have maybe an issue with your pelvis or at your hips that makes it appear like one leg is actually shorter than the other. This is really, really important to determine, and I'll show you a test that you can do with a friend to figure this out so you can basically see this for yourself. Generally, one of the main ways that we treat a leg length discrepancy is by putting a wedge or some sort of change in your footwear to raise the height to an appropriate level to balance things out. But if you don't have a true leg length discrepancy, then chalking up your shoe or putting a wedge in your shoe can be counterproductive in that it's not going to fix anything. It's potentially going to perpetuate a problem that's already there. The first thing that I think is really cool to go through is to show you some assessment techniques to figure out whether you actually have a true leg length discrepancy, whether it's more of a false discrepancy that you can hopefully rectify. So this one is good to have with a friend, but the first thing you can do basically is we can get you to lie on your back. If we get you to bridge up nice and tall, squeeze your butt cheeks, and then drop your pelvis down, and then drop your legs out, if you can have someone reach down and measure the distance between the bumps on the inside of your ankles and just get a sense of where you're at. Now, what you might find is that one bump may feel like it sits a little bit higher than the other. The really interesting thing about that is that when we flip you over onto your belly and you get someone to feel through the bumps at the base of your pelvis, your sit bones, those ischial tuberosities, you can get them to dig a thumb up into that area. So hopefully to show you here, so it's not right in the butt, which would obviously be awkward, but more onto the outside, you'll feel those sit bones. What you'll hopefully see is that, again, one side may sit a little bit higher than the other. Now, what we would expect to see is that the leg that you feel is shorter, you should hopefully see that both of those bones, whether it's the medial malleolus or that ischial tuberosity, that sit bone, you might find that they both sit higher than the other side. But it doesn't confirm it completely until we go through some of these tests and these treatments and then reassess it and see if it's changed. Because one of the things that we see with a leg length discrepancy is it does often relate to a pelvic asymmetry. So when you have your pelvic bowl, we can have two things that tend to give us the appearance of one leg being shorter than the other. The first is what we call an upslip, where one side of your pelvis is raised higher than the other. And again, that makes the most sense. That would drag everything up a little bit higher on one side compared to the other. Also, if one side of your pelvis tilts forward or rolls forward, so we call it an anterior shift or an anterior ilium. And what that does, if this is your sit bone at the bottom and this is the top of your pelvis, as an upslip would just raise everything together. If we tend to anteriorly tilt one side of your pelvis, it raises the sit bone or the ischial tuberosity as well. So one of the things that we want to do for the upslip is we want to give you some exercises to try and bring that back down again. So one of the reasons why that upslip may occur is if the muscles in your back, that quadratus lumborum and some of the joints in your back are stiff and it's sort of pulling up that pelvis to a position that creates that shorter leg. So what we want to try and do is you want to take the ball. So you can take a single lacrosse ball. In this case, I'm going to use a peanut, which is just two lacrosse balls taped together. You can use a tennis ball, you can get a massage, it doesn't matter how you do it. But we're going to get the ball and we're going to place it into the gap between the top of your pelvis and the base of your rib cage. In that area tends to be where that QL sits, and when tight, can potentially pull all of that tissue up on the one side. But more importantly, underneath that, we can often see that there's a lot of stiff and tight lumbar joints. It can also be perpetuating that tightness and holding that pelvis up into a position that can give you the appearance that you have one leg shorter on that side. So we want to take the ball, place it onto the side there, sort of right next to the spine, and then we want to just gently move the ball around, looking for something that feels a little bit tight and a little bit restricted. But again, once you find some tightness here, you can let the ball gently press in. What you can also do is you can gently squeeze that muscle that you're pushing the ball into, get that to activate. The idea being is that when you relax, your brain and nervous system will also reflexively relax that tissue. It should then feel less tender. You should feel like the ball sinks in a little bit easier. And then we can just gently hang out here and move the ball up and down, chasing the areas that you find are tight and restricted. And then again, once you've done that, you can then lift your bottom up, give it a good squeeze, then drop down again, straighten those legs out, and then recheck where those medial malleoli or the bumps on the inside of your ankle tend to be. And if you see that it's gently sort of come down a little bit again, then you know that that's part of the process. Now, the second aspect of this is when we're dealing with that sort of rotated or that asymmetry through your pelvis. We want to give you something to help normalize the tissue that might be holding you in that position so that you can restore that normal motion and hopefully see an improvement in your leg length discrepancy. And a great way to do this is, again, by lying on your back. We want to do some opposing movements here. So if you're able to, we want to get your legs up into this position, this tabletop position. We want to have one hand behind your thigh. We have one hand on the opposite thigh. What we're going to actually do is we're going to repeatedly push and pull against that tissue. So what we're going to do is we're going to push one leg down while pulling one leg back up. And once you've done that for 5 seconds, we're going to change sides. Then we're going to resist in both directions. And we're going to repeat this 10 times. So we're getting both the tissue in your thigh and at the back of the thigh, front of the thigh and the back of the thigh to activate. And it's going to start to pull that pelvis back into a better position. We're going to keep doing this and keep doing this. And then again, once you've done that, you can lift your bottom up again. It should feel a little bit looser, hopefully. And then when you come down from here and measure things again, you'll hopefully see a change in your apparent leg length. So all we've done here is just restore some normality to that pelvis. And by doing so, we'll get a much better idea of what your leg length is actually doing. And then again, once you've done those 2 exercises, as it's raining, we can get you back on your tummy again. Get someone to recheck the position of those sit bones just to make sure that you can see any sort of changes there. And then what you'll hopefully find is that by restoring some normal motion and some normal function of that pelvis, in most cases we see that what appears to be a leg length discrepancy on the surface isn't actually a true leg length discrepancy, it's more pelvic asymmetry. So once we've done those things and you feel confident that you've figured out whether it's a true discrepancy or not, then we can actually begin to have a conversation about why that happened to you in the first place. Depending on what your asymmetry is, like what side's lifted up, what side's rotated backwards or forwards, it tends to be reflective of the positions and the shapes that you get into day to day. The most common one, and again, you probably guessed this as well, is if you have an upslip on one side and you're a male, for example, it's very likely that you're doing something that you have one side raised compared to the other. And that can be something as simple as having your wallet in the back pocket while you're sitting. It can be something as simple for a lot of women or guys where you sit in this position a lot and this pelvic asymmetry gets sort of set over time, so muscles get tight and stiff, which can then again lead to what appears to be a leg length discrepancy. So it goes without saying that if you put in the time into restoring the normal function of that pelvis and evening things out again, it also needs to be paired up with an awareness of your day-to-day postures and shapes to make sure that once you do correct it, that it doesn't want to keep coming back again. So again, I hope that was genuinely helpful. Obviously, if you're someone who has a true leg length discrepancy, it's well worth checking these things out anyway, just in case it may be contributing to the severity of that leg length discrepancy. But for everyone else who hasn't had any of that trauma or any of that dysfunction, and it feels like you have one leg shorter than the other, this stuff is really important to explore to make sure that you're not exposing your body to unnecessary treatments to support or to compensate for that discrepancy when you can try and get to the source of that and try and change that yourself. So ultimately, if you found that helpful, please consider leaving a like rating down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. If that was helpful for you, please consider leaving a super thanks donation on the video. It's just a great way to help support me and the channel, allow me to keep making these videos. I genuinely hope that was helpful for you. If it was, let me know down in the comments below. But with that being said, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.